Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. We are in a series on how to start a movement, and there is no one better that knows about starting a movement from the grassroots than Jennifer Smith. And I'm excited to have her here. She is the founder of Community Carbon Trees. She lives now in Costa Rica, and she has devoted over 17 years to planting more than 550,000 trees. And she works to build the community, to protect biodiversity, and reverse climate change as a model for how all people can coexist with nature. She's a certified auditor of carbon dioxide under international guidelines, which means that as a business or individual, she can let you know how many trees that you plant over the next 25 years will neutralize your carbon footprint. And she is originally from the great state of Louisiana, and she has a lawyer's degree, and that she got in 1993. So she went from there, went down to Costa Rica, fell in love with it there, has never left, or kind of lives there now, and is here to share with us about the movement that she's started. So Jennifer, thank you for being in the Leaders Transformation.
Thank you. I love this opportunity. It's so much fun. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. And thank you to Pete Stedman, because Pete and his family, they're down in Costa Rica and on a wonderful adventure that they've been on for the last, I don't know how many years, but he's very passionate about reforestation and about biodiversity and all of that. And so he's the one that said to me, you got to talk to Tree Jenny, which is Jennifer's nickname. And so that's how we got here. So thank you, Pete, for that. We really appreciate you. So let's just dive right in, because I know we've got a lot to cover, and you are very passionate about your topic. We talked before, and I was thinking, my goodness, I wish I was hitting record while we were talking. So some of it is going to be a recap from what we talked, but I would love for you to share with our listeners about your movement so that they can be inspired and learn. And even for those that are starting their own movement that are trying to figure out how to do it, what are some of the strategies that have worked? So let's start off with what inspired you to start this movement.
When I started working in Costa Rica, I was doing reforestation for private individuals, people who came down here and bought land and wanted to reforest their farms. And at a certain point, I realized that it would be so rewarding if we could do the same work with Costa Ricans who really didn't have any money or any resources other than dead cattle land. And we had a lot of workers with us who were expressing interest in receiving the trees that we were producing and planting on these foreign-owned farms. And so it was a very organic and natural step-by-step process that planted the idea in my head that, hey, we need to be doing this with the Costa Ricans. We need to be creating jobs, creating a relationship with regrowing rainforest instead of fighting about people cutting it down. And I learned through the years of work before starting the organization that most of the reason that local people cut down the rainforest is poverty. Now the foreigners are doing it for real estate development. So that too had a pressure on how do we create a way for the local people to hang on to their land, to fall back in love with their land, to repair and regenerate their land so they could actually make a living off of it. So everything lined up in 2009, and I was very inspired by Barack Obama, who did one of the first crowdsourcing campaigns on the planet. One of my friends wrote me, who knew that I was starting this organization and trying to figure out where to get the funding. And she just said, Jenny, you know, Barack Obama's raised millions of dollars with people just giving $20. And I thought, well, gosh, that's interesting. How does that work? And so I figured out how to get a PayPal, and we had a very simple but informative first website, very plain, and boom, we got our first decent sized donor, over $1,000 from a man in Norway who thought what we were doing was amazing, loved that we paid the workers and that we follow up on every tree for, it ends up being about 6 years. So it started very one tree at a time. It started with friends and family. It started with a hope and a dream and seeing a problem and trying to create an innovative solution. And 11 years later, here we are. We continue to expand and grow, and we continue to hold our ethics to a high standard of tree care and fair pay for our workers. So we are not the cheap trees. We are not the buy a hat and get a tree. We are actually a long-term forest growing organization. You know, really the work starts with planting the tree. So it's been quite an adventurous journey, and there have been a lot of lessons learned along the way that keep informing our growth and our innovation.
So now I know that you alluded to it in the beginning, that you are not about fighting and being part of a, or addressing and focusing on the problem, that you're very passionate about focusing on the solution. And as you pointed out, is that not all tree planting, people don't get paid. The Costa Ricans don't always get paid to plant those trees. So just so people understand the landscape, not criticizing who's doing what or whatever, but really just so that people know, because I don't think most people understand what actually goes on at this level. So what is happening out there with reforestation, or, and then of course you're doing it differently?
It's really a deep question, and it's a deep question of what has been coined now, climate justice. Most of the people suffering the most terribly from climate change are poor people who don't have the money to adapt, don't have the resources to adapt. And that's why the fair pay part of our model is so different than a lot of tree planting organizations. We have been imitated and copied since we went online in 2009, and I know we were one of the first. I mean, there wasn't anybody doing, hey, sponsor a tree back then. And now so many people that I've ended up having conversations with, or who even come to Costa Rica to meet me, have ended up creating their own projects that have far exceeded us in the fundraising level. But I don't know if they will exceed us on the forest growing level, because survival rates depend on follow-up management. So that would be the second difference. Not only are we paying people to do the work, from collecting the seed, from making the compost with women for the tree nurseries, for transplanting and working in these nurseries, the trees need about 1.5 years before we can plant them. And then the transport and preparing the land. And then these 4 to 6 years of follow-up, chopping grasses, making sure the trees don't choke in the growing cattle grasses and the regenerating vegetation. So that is very different. I have not come across many groups who are actually doing the follow-up work, ensuring and guaranteeing that every tree planted is actually growing. Even in Costa Rica, the government gives away a lot of trees, but nobody's getting paid. And I've seen Costa Ricans, get 100 free trees, and 2 years later, those same 100 free trees are sitting by the porch, dried out and dead. It's so much work to chop the regenerating cattle grasses and really get those trees to grow. It's itchy, it's scratchy, it's hot, it's dangerous. There's snakes. It's hard work. And so being a lawyer, it was really important for me to really look at that. Dare I call it slavery, because really taking advantage of very poor people. And because the tree is so beautiful and everyone loves trees, it's like, oh, we'll give them the trees and they get to have the fruit one day as their pay. And I'm like, ooh, that doesn't feel right to me. And there are no industry standards in our industry. You know, coal miners, they've got laws protecting them. Most workers, even moving into these sweatshops, like with the fast fashion industry, even people are becoming more aware of those industries having this real taking advantage of people who are in poverty. And the tree planting industry is totally non-regulated, and it's allowed a lot of marketers to come in who are very savvy, and they're like, give us $1 and 1 million people give $1, and then those 1 million people like go around feeling really good about themselves because they think that they're growing a tree. But you know, I haven't seen the proof of the forest. These are new groups. I don't know. I don't know what's happening.
That's a really great point. It's not just about the planting, because there's been a lot of emphasis on planting, but what you're talking about is growing. So you don't just plant the trees, you grow the trees, you're growing a forest. And so there's a big distinction.
Forest.
Yes,
Yeah.
big distinction.
And that's much more expensive to collect seeds and produce big fat trees that are going to survive in these rough conditions in the tropics. Much more difficult to produce 125 different kinds of trees than to go buy, you know, 500 bags of seeds of all the same tree and just, you know, grow some little tiny trees and throw them out in the field and call it good. And you know, it used to bother me a lot because we work so hard and we know what we're doing works. And then I recognized that was depleting me, and I was like in a negative vortex about it. And again, like you said, you know, it is about the solution and championing the multi-level stacking functions of this solution, because it's very true that the best guardians of the forest, people are going to protect a forest that they've gotten paid to grow, that there's some accountability and some self-esteem and some pride. Like, look what I've done, and I got paid. Like, somebody came and checked on me. I think people want that. At least the Costa Ricans I'm working with, they love our farm visits. They have all these questions, and they feel really proud of their growing forest. And then that forest is full of products and things that they can sell, that they can eat, that they can barter. Their soils regenerate. They get off the herbicides and pesticides. Dried up streams and water springs start to relive and bubble again. So it really is regenerative, not just the agriculture and the environment, but the community. People start to talk to each other. They start to care what's happening on each other's neighboring farms. They begin to, you know, report when someone's using a bunch of herbicide, and they take it upon themselves to go to that person and say, you know, that herbicide is running into our water source. We don't want to drink that. We don't want to swim in that. We don't want our cows drinking that. We don't want our children playing on that roadside full of herbicide. So we've seen a lot of really positive indirect consequences of really being on the ground with the communities and being present throughout the growing of the new forest.
Now, why is the tropics the area to actually grow trees? So you can grow trees anywhere. Yes. I'm in Canada. We were having this conversation. I was saying how, you know, even just driving along the road and I see all of these industrial complexes, and there's lots of places where we could plant trees and, you know, and grow a forest even, and and impact the carbon footprint. But you pointed out why it's important to grow these trees, in particular close to the equator. So can you talk about that?
I love this. It's such a publicized piece of knowledge, but truly trees within 10 degrees of the equator in the tropics are sequestering just compounded amounts of carbon dioxide. And the reason is because we never have a cold season, doesn't turn into winter here. And so the trees grow much bigger, much harder, faster. And so the amount of carbon dioxide sequestered in a tree depends on the size and depends on the density. So we're growing these really hard, exotic tropical lumber along with all kinds of fruit. And so we can put our 5 to 10-year-old tree next to a 5 to 10-year-old tree in Canada, and there's no comparison. Our tree dwarfs that Canadian tree. And then because we have this real intense hot dry season in the tropics, they become very dense. Even the fruit trees, just dense and heavier. And the heavier they are, the bigger carbon factor they have. So when that plugs into the carbon equation, the density multiplied by the size and the number of years it's been growing, we just blow away trees in any temperate climate. And it's very logical. It makes sense to people. So we're talking about the carbon there, but then to go into the water cycle, which is as big a problem we're facing as humanity right now as the carbon. And it actually dovetails in. So the scientists explain that we've got double the amount of water vapor in our atmosphere than historically we've ever had. And water vapor is a greenhouse gas. And, we do that little scientific experience when we're kids, and you put the little cover over a little plant, and the next morning you see the condensation. That's the plant evotranspiring the water vapor out of its system. So the trees on the equator here, especially in Costa Rica, where it rains so much, they're making clouds. They're making cool, cumulus, fluffy clouds that go into these spiraling currents that wrap around our planet. And those clouds are actually going to you and the North Atlantic currents in Canada. They're going to Europe, going to California, going all around the planet. So the more cool clouds, this fat, cool cloud can freeze in that current, and it won't just dump its water out. So we can solve the broken half hydrological cycle by returning the tree into that cycle, slowing down the evotranspiration, and really making sure that what we're putting in those currents are getting all the way around the planet to Kenya, to Syria, to these places that historically in the last 10 years have just completely dried out. So we care about the water. We cannot live without water. No way. And the equator, the rainforest, tropical rainforest is really driving that water cycle, both from a cooling aspect and getting some of that extra water vapor out of the air, and also in the rain aspect. Because if we don't reforest, if we leave these pastures bare, they turn into a hot skillet. So when water hits a hot skillet, it skittles up. That's the extra water vapor that's in our greenhouse gas mix. And if we can get rid of that extra water vapor, it's also going to help us regulate the temperatures. So, we're accomplishing 5 or 6 very important things with the hydrological cycle simply by working on the equator. So I would say between carbon and the water issue, there's no tree that's going to ever compare with a tropical rainforest tree. And yeah, we love trees everywhere. We want people to plant locally. And, when I was growing up, I think we talked about this. There was a cool bumper sticker. I had one. It was act locally, think globally. Well, now 2020 is coming. We got to act locally and we got to act globally. We have to do both. We can't just go, well, I'm going to plant trees in my backyard and that's good enough. Yes, that's great. Those trees are going to give you fruit that's going to work your local micro ecosystem. But if the rainforest trees are not there, then the trees in your backyard may not get enough rain, or it may get too hot or too cold. The extremes of temperature are also part of what is happening with the climate crisis. So truly, we got to do both. And so that's what we aim to do with our movement, is give people a place where they can act globally.
I love it. So let's talk about how your movement, how it's structured. So you have tree ambassadors.
We do.
And people can also donate. So talk about what that looks like.
Yeah, we wanted to give people a way to volunteer. I get a lot of people, can I come plant trees? I say, no, it's hard. We want to create jobs, but we do want participation. Participation is the juice of life. And so we wanted to create a way where people could be activists, like you're being an activist right now, helping us get our message out with marketing, articles, sharing, social media, podcasts, video, whatever it may be. That's one way. And another way is our tree ambassador program. And so I think we have about 40 now. And these are people who just take our message, turn it into their own, do fundraisers, do social media, work through their own networks or their own business with a give back, basically along the lines of, hey, I'm creating a beautiful product. I've got a skincare program and I want to donate whatever voluntary percentage of my profits. And we allow them to put our logo on their product, and we give them some suggested information for their catalogs, their website, whatever it may be. Some of them go as far as having us calculate a carbon footprint for them or for their product. So we love our tree ambassadors, and they love it. They feel that they're doing their part. And I think that people want that more and more. They don't want to just give money, although we want people to just give money. However, there are ways to be very participative. And then here in Costa Rica, when people do come to the country, we do offer service days in our tree nurseries. That's a fun place that people can schedule some time, come, get their hands in the soil, make compost, transplant baby trees, weed, rotate trees, collect seeds with us. So we do create that hands-on capability. I do receive a few interns per year. It's really on an application basis. And those programs are very solid and fun and rewarding, not just for the people, but for those of us in the organization who participate with the people who come on that person-to-person level. We usually find that if somebody actually comes and goes on a tour with us to one of our projects or comes to the nursery, they learn so much that they leave and they're like, I'm giving people trees for Christmas. How do I be a tree ambassador? I want my yoga retreat to give. So we like to meet the people. We just don't want to throw them in the field and trying to do a job they're not experienced, to do.
And they really just want they want the experience. That's why people say, I want to come down and plant some trees, because they want that experience where they're connected to it and they get that feeling like they're actually doing something rather than just sending a check. But sending money, if they recognize and understand why that is important and that they are, benefiting the cause through that, I think that's really valuable. I have a question actually about how many, because I know there has been so much deforestation. I don't know if you know this number, But how many trees need to be planted in order to replace what has been lost?
I
Do you
may
have
be
any idea?
making it up. I'm not sure why. I'm thinking it's something like 13 trillion,
Wow.
but they need to be grown, not
Yes.
planted, so they've
Planted and grown. Yeah.
got to survive. And I know in our case, without follow-up maintenance, we lose it. We don't, but I've seen the losses, and it's 80%
Yeah.
die. With good maintenance over a 25-year cycle, really 85 to 90% live.
Right.
So over the first 4 years, we replace every tree that dies. And then at year 6, we go in and do a pruning, which helps the trees keep getting bigger. We basically, when the canopy closes, when the trees start touching each other up in the canopy, then we open some light, we cut some lower branches, and then that way the trees can get bigger. And again, if you're looking at carbon offsets, then you want the tree to get as big as it can. And so good forest management is absolutely critical so these projects don't stunt. I've seen monoculture, which would be those one kind of tree projects, like literally stop growing around 12 years old. Everything starts to die. And that's because every different kind of tree has a different kind of root structure. So if you're doing one kind of tree, they're all sucking the nutrients out of one level of the underground, and there's nothing left. They've completely decimated the nutrient base, and they start to die. So again, we have to do this 13 trillion thing right, or what's the point? Who are we fooling? As humans, we get so into our marketing, and we think we're doing a good thing, and we have a good intention. I know all these tree people, I feel like there's good intentions there, and I think that's why I speak out and I say, look, not naming names, but let's look at this. Let's do it right, y'all. Like, it really is up to us to do it right. And I'm encouraged. I think that more and more people are realizing it goes beyond planting the tree.
How much does it cost to plant and grow a tree, one tree?
So our model, we ask for $25 per tree. And that covers from the seed to the meeting with the farmers, nursery work, the women's compost movement, kids' day activities that are really free. We do those for free, but we do childhood and youth education, which ends up being parental education because the parents are like, oh, yay, it's kids' day. I can go ask Jenny a bunch of questions. And that's great. And then the 4 years of management plus the 6-year CHOP insurance for all the workers, fair pay for every hour that people work. And then after that 6-year point, we have a yearly meeting where the farmers come, we make, food, everybody gets together, they ask any questions. If they need an agroforestry visit, one of us goes. They have to give a report that their fences are in good shape, an estimation if they've lost any trees, and we just stay in touch with the people in that way. And so the $25 is a solid number. There's not a huge administration nut in there. It's not even 6%, I think. It's very low, and there's also not a big marketing budget in there. And we really do let the marketing happen just as you and I are doing it. It is part of the volunteering process, and perhaps we could have grown bigger, faster in some way by spending more money on marketing. But to me, this has really been an innovation in a movement. Like, let's get the maximum number of people feeling good about this, feeling good about that they're doing something, that they can look their children in the eye and go, yeah, I know you're concerned, but we're doing this, and I have kids that are some of our best fundraisers, or 5 kids come to mind that have done some really neat fundraisers. A couple school teachers have done some neat projects, and we're very open to people's ideas about what they want to do and how they want to do it. We don't micromanage that. We say, you let us help you and support you, but be creative, be wild, whatever you want to do to try to raise money. We love it. And
so how can you scale? Because I know there's only one of you and you have a team and so forth. So I'm thinking of somebody that's listening that is inspired by this and says, we need to do something about this. And I want to, and I'm going to put it out there that there's going to be somebody who's going to listen, who's going to say, I want to give you a lump sum of money or an ongoing amount of money that is substantial enough for you to scale. So if that were to happen, how would you be able to scale? What would you need in order to do that?
We've been planning for this success, and we've had a few, lump, decent sized givers. So we have been in the process of scaling. And one thing that we're about to complete are our manuals that basically breaks the work down into, let's call them pods, and each pod has a leader. There are 5 pods. There's the tree planters, the farm owners, the women's group that does seed collection and composting. There's the administrative pod, which includes our accountants. And then there's the ACCT, that's us, ACCT, the agroforesters, people who work, like right hands, left hands, same hands as I do. So we've got people who are ready to take on more work when we have more money. I just am finishing a business plan right now for some people that I met in my recent travels to London, and I loved their last question. It was, how fast can you scale and how many trees could you do? And I said, well, next year we can go 30,000 trees. When I say next year, planting season would start in May. Of course, we'd have to up the nurseries and the seed collection, but as it is, we produce 20 to 25,000 trees a year anyway. That felt good for that not to be a scary question or a hard question, because with the manuals and the lessons learned that are encapsulated in those manuals, we learned a lot of lessons while this has been pretty manageable and small with a smaller budget. And so really taking all of that with a larger budget, we're ready. And so I do believe that we will be scaling. I think that its time has come. We have the trajectory of work. We have the forests we can show. We have the administration. We have the beautiful accounting due diligence, rosters and rosters and rosters of humans working and getting paid. I mean, you can't fake that stuff. So I really believe that doing it right and holding this high standard of insisting on fair pay, insisting on biodiversity, and insisting women included, and that we are honoring the farm owners, by empowering them to keep their land. We don't want to spend donor money and buy land. And people say, oh, well, how are you going to make sure the forest lives? And I say, well, because we use these sociocracy principles, which is part of permaculture principles, and we use horizontal management with this pod system, with leaders in the pods, local community leaders. That was the last pod I didn't mention, both a man leader and a woman leader that liaison with all the other pods. It's really very simple. I set it up and practiced over these years with a lot of people involved, and we saw that keep it simple, silly. Really, streamlined, lean management, lean administration. And by teaching these local people and walking the process that they're managing themselves, it goes back to that self-esteem, pride, self-care, neighborhood vigilance. So we can feel very secure that because they're making money off this, they're not going to go cut their forest down. And if they do, well, you know, there's a very simple contract we sign at the beginning of the process, and there's an enforcement provision, and the community's watching. You know, it's like there are eyes everywhere within the communities that we work.
And is it
really
true that they're probably not the ones that are wanting to cut down the trees in the first place?
They aren't. You know, the only reason they really did it in these bigger cattle farms was in the 1970s. They were subsidized. They were paid. They didn't even take the trees out and like build things out of it to preserve all that carbon. They burned it. All that carbon was released back into the air because most of the land was so steep and there was no way to get the trees off and nowhere to, you know, mill them, and no markets open. The government just got a bunch of foreign money and was like, we're going to grow cattle and we're going to pay you to burn your forest down and do it. And what they didn't really realize long term was that rainforest soil is like that thick, that deep. Couple years of heavy rain alternating with burning sun, that topsoil is gone. It's gone. And so then they've got these really genetically modified cattle grasses out there, and not a tree can get through there because, oh, just let it grow back. I've seen what regeneration without any human assistance looks like. It's scraggly. There's no trees in there. It's a bunch of what we call tacotal. It's viney and thorny and some pioneering shrubbery, but you're not getting all this beautiful biodiverse animal food, human food, lumber, medicine, flowering trees for bees.
If you would have left it alone the first time around, it would have been fine. But once you start messing with it, then you kind of have to mess with it to get it back to that.
And
yeah.
Planting these super aggressive cattle grasses that not a thing can get through. And then miraculously, you know, they've modified these grasses to live in the full sun. Well, once you start shading the grasses with the trees growing up, and we cut a circle around each tree for these first 4 years, about 3 times a year, each tree is visited by a worker with a machete, getting paid, counting every tree on that farm. And once that shade starts shading that cattle grass, it begins to die. And the hidden jewel plants and seeds that are there that have been dormant begin to activate with the lower temperatures. The soil begins to absorb the water. The trees begin to drop biomass. We start having birds come and animals. So their urine has urea, which actually fertilizes. The fungus, the hongos, the mushrooms return. The soil starts rolling. It becomes soft and loamy and fertile again. It looks like somebody went in and landscaped with all kinds of birds of paradise and different kinds of plants. And we didn't plant that. It came back once the trees got big enough to offer some shade and get those cattle grasses out. And so it's a lot of patience and a lot of work to get to that stage. But all of a sudden, around 4 to 5 years, it's unbelievable how much the trees regenerate. They really do. We can do this, humans. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's a lot of work. It does cost money to do it right. And people people can succeed, regenerating their farms and keeping their land. I mean, what is it? We're down to like 1% of the campesinos still own land. It's either owned by foreigners or multinational corporations. I mean, we have moved into really the 1% of the wealthy people own 99% of the land on the planet. And the 99% of the humans own 1% of the land. So, I see there's a great vulnerability of campesinos who still own a little piece of land. And I think it's important that they continue to own that land. I mean, they grow our food, and disenfranchised, or people who lose their land, they change. They move to the city. They've never lived in the city before. They become alcoholics. Sometimes they completely lose their vibe. And so I think that it's an important aspect of this question of how do we do it with the local people?
Yeah. Oh my goodness, you are so passionate, and you're like this bright light. You have the light shining on you, which is perfect, because you are such a bright light. And I'm so inspired, and I feel so much more educated about trees, about how the whole system works, how it impacts our whole ecosystem. And it gives me ideas in terms of, like, when you say so many foreigners, multinationals, own the land, and to even inspire them to how do they use that land wisely for the greater good, for that global impact that you're talking about, I think is so important. So thank you so much for sharing a few minutes all the way from Costa Rica on this beautiful day, sharing a little bit of your passion and your experience with us.
Thank you so much, Nicole. It's just such a pleasure, and I just appreciate your network and your work as well. It's really important. Thank you.
Yeah. And for our listeners, I encourage you to follow Jenny and to go to communitycarbontrees.org to learn more about what it is they're doing. You can also find Tree Jenny on social. Her hashtag is Tree Jenny, and so you can find her there, or you can go #GiveBack. I know that she started using that long time ago, and it became quite popular. But you can find her and follow her and support what she's doing. And we're going to look for ways to also support her and seeing what we can do with the Leaders Transformation going forward, and our listeners and community to be able to support this. But, we've got to have trees, and we got to not just plant trees, we got to grow forests. So help us do that. Help Jenny do that. She's got the experience, and she's got the people that know how to do it. And what I also envision is the fact that she's documented how she's doing it means that it can be duplicated over and over and over again. And so the scalability here is there's definitely potential there. So leaders of transformation, take action. Take action today. Maybe, you say, I don't have a lot to donate, or my time, or anything like that. But you know what? I think that it's $25 to support and to grow and plant and grow a tree is $25. So you can donate $25, and maybe it's one a month or something like that. It makes a difference. Every little amount makes a difference. So we encourage you to do that. We'd love to hear your stories. You can go on the leadersoftransformation.com. You can follow us on social as well. And we'd love to hear your stories. We'd love to hear how this has impacted you, how it's inspired you as a movement maker yourself, and or to even be involved in what they're doing down in Costa Rica. We'd love to hear your stories. And if there's any way that we can support you in what you're doing, please let us know. We love to hear it. So thank you again. Thank you, Jenny. And we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.